So when we work with newer leaders, we typically want to teach them a foundational leadership skill, which is the idea that you need to vary your approach based on a person and a situation. And to do that, we use this very simple continuum framework that shows a range of approaches from a highly directive approach to a highly developmental. We'll take a minute to explain both of those approaches and then talk about how you might use this. What does a directive approach look like? When a leader is taking a more directive approach, typically they are using step-by-step instructions and really explaining a right way and a wrong way of doing a task, and often giving a lot of supervision. And oftentimes when we show that list to newer leaders, they think that looks like a list of what not to do. It just looks like the wrong answer. It's micromanaging. But in fact, it's really important for them to recognize that there are scenarios in which this is the most appropriate path to take. For example, if you have a brand new employee who might be really frustrated by a more open-ended or developmental approach, if you are teaching policy that has a right and a wrong answer, if you are under a highly urgent or emergency situation that requires order giving instead of brainstorming, and also if you have someone who is not extremely motivated, you might find yourself leaning more towards a directive approach in order to deliver a result. If we look then at the other end of the continuum, which is the developmental approach, and think about what this looks like, this is an approach that is far more invested in skill development of the employee. It typically requires more time. And while you continue to give them air cover, you are not supervising each task completion very closely. And so often you would want to use this approach with someone who's highly motivated, a more practiced or skilled or experienced employee who's ready to take on new challenges, and when you have the time available for mistakes to be made and lessons to be learned. So what's important to recognize about your choices between a directive and a developmental approach, and also you can fall anywhere along this continuum, is that, as we mentioned, there are many different factors that can influence what your choice is. And those can include the nature of the task, how difficult it is, whether it's a regulatory environment or not, the skill level of the employee, how motivated is someone? Someone's skills and tenure might lead you to believe that a more developmental approach is appropriate, but you might find that that person is not performing or delivering results. And so you need to be more directive and then build back up with that person. And also the time available. More time is going to allow you to do the coaching and support that are needed to be successful in a more developmental scenario. What is most important for newer leaders to understand, however, is that there is one thing that's not on this list, and that is your preference. Newer leaders tend to need to develop their skills and muscles around is that their preferred approach or preferred method of solving a problem or tackling an issue or creating something new is not necessarily going to be appropriate for the people who are working for them or for each situation that they encounter. And so the leadership approach that you choose is not about you. That can be really difficult to understand because, after all, you were promoted as a result of being a very efficient and effective operator and doing the job really well. But other people are going to find different approaches that work well for them. And so what you need to do as a leader is to think about the other person and the situation and separate your preferences from both of those things. What you can do as a newer leader is consider different leadership scenarios and think about where you would fall along this continuum for that issue and for that person. And what's important is that you be intentional, about the approach that you want to take, and that all of your next steps and actions are consistent with that intended approach. If they're inconsistent, then you're going to create confusion and probably demotivate people. It's also important that you be clear and communicate your intended approach and explain why. Give context for that choice to the person that you're working with so that they understand. Particularly when you're taking a more directive approach, someone can get disengaged unless they truly understand the environment in which you're making that decision and why it's the right decision for them. So be sure to continuously monitor the performance, the motivation, and the results of your team members so you can adapt your approach over time to suit their developmental needs.